To genuinely help yourself and to develop yourself to attain the level of confidence and self-esteem you need to reach for your dreams, you need to attack the root of whatever's holding you back. While this book doesn't address your personal challenges, it offers general information about the origins of our beliefs about ourselves. While the details will be different for every living person, the big picture will be much the same for all of us. We're born, and as soon as we're conscious of our human status, it starts to hurt in various ways. There are no exceptions to that rule. While pain and disappointment are experienced in a myriad of ways, they are experienced by all of us in varying degrees. We all tend to believe that our situations are unique. We don't know that many others have sustained wounds like our own. While the circumstances may vary in detail, the sources of those wounds are primarily found in childhood, in the time of our innocence before we came to understand more about the world. While childhood is romanticized, it's also the time of our lives in which we're powerless. We're powerless to defy, as we're under the care of our parents. We're almost powerless to reason, as our young minds are heavily influenced by the words and actions of adults who are responsible for our upbringing. We are at the mercy of parents, teachers, and other authority figures. We depend on these adults to point us in the right direction. But what if they've been as out of the loop as we are? What if the adults don't understand that their stray words and actions have a lasting impact on the minds of children? The young mind is a plastic thing, malleable and porous. It is subject to what it encounters, and when what the child's mind encounters is negative, negativity is the lens through which we view the world, whether we're entirely conscious of it or not. Reducing the influence of that negativity is how we move through to the other side of the early messages we received that impact our ability to succeed. While the light may enter through our wounds, it's not in our best interest to allow them to gape open throughout our lives. The walking wounded don't tend to get things done. So, what self-help and personal development are really about is finding ways and means to heal the wound. The light has entered. Now, it's up to you to interpret its impact and lessons and to heal the wounds you've collected. Wounds are not nurtured or coddled. They're to be healed with self-love. Rebuilding your self-concept. Because you're actively seeking to help and develop yourself by reading this book, you're already self-aware. You already know that you're seeking change and a better life for yourself. But not everyone is there yet. Some go through their lives never questioning the messages they've absorbed as children. They take them as gospel, never seeking to break away from or to rewrite those messages. But as a self-aware person, you have a distinct advantage. You've taken a little time to self-reflect, and you've examined your thoughts and how you feel about life and why. You've stuck your fingers in your wounds and said, ouch. You know that you are not the sum of the messages you heard from the adults around you during your childhood. You know you are in there, somewhere. For you, the process of change will come more easily than it will for those who have no impulse to question the world around them or their experiences. Because you're already self-aware, you're already moving toward rebuilding your self-concept. Self-actualization is a word that's not very well understood, to be honest. But if you look at the root of the word actualization, it means to update. So what you're going to do as you rebuild your self-concept is update the way you see yourself, your potential, your aptitudes, and your gifts. You're going to renew your relationship with yourself by clearing out the negative and self-defeating clutter. Self-love. I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but when I was a child, society dictated that you weren't supposed to love yourself. You were supposed to love God, the flag, your country, and your family. But you weren't supposed to love yourself because that was considered as egoist and negative. Back in those unenlightened days, it was considered narcissistic to love yourself. It was considered big-headed. Especially if you were a girl, you weren't supposed to think much of yourself at all. In those times, self-love was viewed with suspicion. But self-love is the ground of all positive change. Every little thing we do out of love for ourselves and the desire for our lives to more closely reflect our most beloved dreams is a good thing. And no, self-love is not narcissistic. Narcissism is a trait we all have in varying degrees. For the most part, it's our will to survive and our urge to succeed that defines narcissism in the average person's psychological makeup. We're not talking about the pathological variety here, but the healthy type of self-respect that prevents the world from rolling over us like a steamroller. Self-love, in truth, is a healthy self-concept in which you are not necessarily the center of the universe, but you are an integral part of it, with plenty to offer. It's being comfortable with who you are, understanding the sources of self-doubt, shame, and low self-esteem, and moving through those corrosive influences to emerge whole. You're in there somewhere, underneath all the layers of messaging received in childhood and beyond. Messages that have imparted misinformation about your value as a person and your potential, like, you'll never amount to anything. You're just a girl. You're not smart enough for that job. No one will ever hire you. No one will ever love you. You need to aim lower. You'll have to satisfy yourself with a job that pays the rent. I wouldn't bother going to a university if I were you. You can't do that. You can't do what you want to do in life if you want to survive. All these messages are lies. But the sad fact is that we all internalize negative messaging. We'll talk more about the preponderance and influence of negative messaging in Chapter 3, where we'll discover why we prefer to believe the negative over the positive. We are conditioned to prefer it, starting in childhood. And to internalize a message is to believe it, to live by its edicts and absorb it as a truth about ourselves. The opposite of that process is loving yourself enough to know your truth. What are your core values? What are your strengths? What do you have to offer? Defining your truth. While defining your truth can take time, if you're not intentional about it, intentionally pursuing it and concretizing it in your mind fast-tracks the negation of the messages listed above. You can override these messages by getting in touch with what you feel is true about you and what flies in the face of the messages you've been subjected to over the course of time. One of the first things to understand about negative messaging that we've internalized is that it's based on projection. In psychology, projection is the act of mentally attributing all the things we're unsatisfied about in ourselves onto someone else. The practice usually happens when someone sees negativity in themselves, and the only way to get rid of these feelings is to project them onto others. In short, negative messages come from a very sad place: the messenger's deep-seated self-doubt. The real message, veiled in negativity directed at someone else, is, why should you be any happier or more successful or confident than I am? As ugly as that sounds, it's something a lot of people do without even being aware that they're doing it. Projecting one's perceived shortcomings and failures onto another person, even your child, is like the steam rising in a pressure cooker. It relieves the person who is projecting of the burden of their own insecurities. Instead, you take them on. While the projector will continue to labor under the weight of their self-doubt, they feel a temporary sense of relief when they throw a little your way. So what do you do with these messages? You reverse them. This is a great way to start turning your negativity into self-love. It's a form of individual defiance which releases you from imposed negativity, replacing it with ideation that's rooted in your core truths, which we'll return to momentarily. Let's take the negative messages we've just read and manipulate them into a more pleasing shape. My life will be marked by success. I am a capable human being. I am intelligent enough for the kind of job I want. I'm the kind of employee people are happy to hire. I am lovable. My reach is defined by my ambition. I am qualified for higher paying jobs. I will attend university and graduate. I can do anything I set my mind to. I will live well, doing what I know I'm good at. Rejecting negative messaging is about more than replacing the negativity in your mind with superficial positivity, though. All these statements are true, but they become irrefutable when you have taken the time to define your core values and truths. So let's talk about that, keeping in mind that this is the ground from which we attack what's getting in our way, which is mostly us. So what this is really about is getting out of your own way. Your core values and truths. What you believe about yourself is as complex of what you've experienced. Your childhood, your experience of the world outside the family home, and what you've read and viewed are all part of how you form your self-perception or self-concept and the values that come with that assessment. When you're able to clearly define your values based on your life experiences, what you've derived from being a human in the world, you're aligning yourself as a human agent with those values. You're reifying, incarnating them, by living them intentionally. The following are several steps to guide you to what those values and core truths are. As you proceed, remember that your values and truths must come from you and no other source. There is no filtering permitted here. You need to be very honest with yourself and unafraid to adhere to values and truths that you genuinely hold. These are the essence of you and not subject to the opinions or input of anyone else but you. Identifying significant moments. Review moments from your life that stand out for you. These may be teachable moments, moments of extreme discomfort, crises, disasters, or events which pushed you to becoming who you are. Whether happy or miserable, you learned something from all these moments. You took lessons from them. As you review, identify the lessons and write them down. Narrow down your list. Once you've written down your watershed life events, narrow them down into those you deem most significant. See if you can use a single word or phrase to express what you learned from the event. Narrow the list further. Go through the list again, but this time, place a red check mark next to items that resonate most potently with you. These are items that resonate with you because they express both who you are and who you know you can grow to become. Top 10. Finally, select the 10 items on your list of moments that best express your values. These are the convictions you have about life, people, work, and relationships. These are the core values that have the greatest meaning to you. They define you and the way you live your life. Monthly review. Every month, sit down with your top 10 list and reevaluate while asking yourself the following. Does this value flow naturally through me? Does anything on this list not feel true? Which of these items is the most difficult for me to adhere to? Should I remove some items, or add some items, or even reword some items? Yearly review. Every year you should produce a statement of values. This will act as your personal mission statement, providing you with a snapshot of your self-expectations based on the self-evaluating function of your top 10 list of core values and truths. While you're doing this, ask yourself the following. How do my behaviors reflect my core values and truths? Which of my values are responsible for creating positive relationships? Which of my values support my well-being and overall health? Which of my values drive financial success and professional upward mobility? Have I honored my values over the past year? Once you've asked yourself all these questions, rework your top 10 list to reflect what you've discovered about how closely aligned your behaviors and actions are. Are you living your values and truths? Once you've done that, create a permanent record. This may be a cross-stitch sampler or anything else visual. What you want is a visual reminder of your top 10 list that you can refer to whenever you feel the need. This will keep you grounded and focused on what you've discovered about yourself. By focusing on your core values and truths, you're molding your life into your own shape and not the shape of what's expected by others. It is authentic, and it rejects the negative messaging we've collected about ourselves through time. By defining the reality of who you are in terms of what you truly believe in and what you believe about yourself, you are pushing yourself to live more fully and intentionally in those beliefs. You are refining and distilling yourself into a healthier version, a version that isn't influenced by the negativity that can haul you up short, just as you're about to make progress. When you know who you are, you know the way forward, and there is nothing that can stand in your way. Self-love is putting yourself and your values at the center of your life, not to anyone else's detriment, but for your own benefit. In your core values and truths is the essential you, the person that you know is in there somewhere. This is the version of you that's able to rise above the negative messaging we all collect in this challenging life. And when you've risen above that noise, you're able to go where you want to go unhindered. In the next 2 chapters, we'll continue going deep to examine where the negativity we too often wallow in comes from. It's not that big a mystery, But sometimes it helps to have it all laid out in black and white, so that's what we're going to do. First, we're going to talk about family relationships, especially toxic ones, to discover how they can taint every other relationship in our lives and to derail our chances of happiness. After that, we're going to talk about self-doubt and the negativity we're all prey to but have no obligation to wallow in. Detoxifying. Letting go means to come to the realization that some people are part of your history, but not a part of your destiny. Steve Maraboli. The quotation above refers directly to people. That's a part of what we're going to talk about in this chapter. The people around you. But toxicity isn't only present in our lives in the form of the people we know and associate with. Toxicity can be your job. Toxicity can be a pattern of behavior. Toxicity can be a pattern of thought. We cover negative thinking in Chapter 3, but here, to get the ball rolling, I want to talk a little about other forms of toxicity in your life and how they may be holding you back. We don't always choose the people around us. That's true of our families. And our families aren't always the warm, fuzzy, supportive embrace we suppose them to be. Sometimes, families are swamps of toxicity. And the toxicity in our families can lead us to seek out similar toxicity in our other relationships. Like negative thinking, familial toxicity is recognizable to us. We're used to it. We may not like it, but it's familiar, and so we tolerate it. There's also the strong social prohibition against cutting difficult family members out of your reality at play. We're told to get along with the uncle who ruins every family holiday by descending into a drunken rant over the turkey dinner, or the sister who remarks negatively on everything we say and do whenever we see her. We're told that keeping peace in the family trumps any discomfort on our part. Family is family, everyone shrieks over the gravy bowl as your drunk uncle downs another tumbler of whiskey, even as he proceeds to slam into Grandma's walker trying to get to the washroom. But whether your toxic family member is a distant cousin or your mom, you have the right to be free of the toxicity that person floods your life with. If any of this sounds familiar, keep reading. You're going to learn how to deal with toxic family members in this chapter. That discussion will lead us to other relationships. Because when there's a toxic undertow in the family home or the extended family, it will follow you if you don't neutralize it. That toxic undertow will insinuate itself into your romantic relationships, friendships, and the professional settings you work in. Why wouldn't that be the case? It's what you're used to. As American as apple pie. John Bradshaw, a family dynamics expert, posits that 96% of American families are dysfunctional. So, while most of us are high-functioning, apparently normal people, almost all of us come from families who may be characterized as dysfunctional. What does that word mean, though, in terms of family dynamics? Dysfunction is a failure to operate according to an accepted standard, and in terms of the family, that standard is providing a nurturing, healthy environment for all members. While not all families include children these days, all families include interactions between members. When these interactions are marred by the presence of mental illness, usually undiagnosed, substance abuse, or other addictions like work, gambling, social media, or sex, abuse and neglect are often the results. Children living in such settings tend to be the last priority, as the family in question seeks to cater to the needs of the locus of the dysfunction. This locus of dysfunction is enabled by a codependent personality, marriage partner or other responsible adult in families that don't feature a couple at the center of the family unit, mother, aunt, cousin, sibling, etc. Codependents serve dysfunction by manipulating themselves into the shape of the dysfunction they're serving. They seek to create buffers around the dysfunction instead of addressing it directly. Often submissive, this leaves other family members to figure out why the cause of all the problems seems to operate unhindered. Quite often, children will blame themselves for situations like those described. Children will also bear the brunt of abuse and neglect from their family members. Children rely on adults to care for them and to do everything necessary to create a comfortable, safe home to nurture them in through to adulthood. But in the presence of family dysfunction, there is little comfort and, often, less safety. Characteristics of dysfunctional families. Dysfunctional families may struggle with generational challenges, But these problems can arise when the structure of a family changes, either through marriage or other circumstances, like moving to be closer to family, or change in the dynamics of the family. Some key characteristics include fractured or passive-aggressive communication, triangulation, talking about one family member to another instead of being direct, substance abuse, unreasonable expectations. One or both parents may seek validation in the success of a child or children to compensate for their own perceived shortcomings. Empathic shortfall. Instead of unconditional love, children are met with authoritarianism and judgment. Controlling behavior. Children may be strictly controlled, either through overprogramming or conditions like curfews or parents encouraging competition between children. Extreme criticism. Children feel as though there is nothing they can do to satisfy the demands of their caregivers, draining them of motivation to act independently. Why am I talking about family dysfunction? Because it's one of the underlying issues that almost all of us face. What happens in the family is carried forward in life, coloring our actions and reactions. Examining the influence of our early lives in adulthood is one way we can learn to reprogram any distorted self-beliefs that can result from less than ideal family situations. Detoxifying is part of becoming the best version of yourself that is possible. This chapter feeds into the next, which addresses self-doubt. I hope to provide the tools you need to effectively detoxify yourself from beliefs instilled in childhood, in the home, in school, and in social settings. Once you're able to see your negative beliefs about yourself in a depersonalized, objective way, you'll be far less likely to believe them. You were not born with these beliefs. They took root in you because you believed something you were told. Now, it's time to deconstruct the process by which these beliefs came to be part of your psychological makeup. By understanding their source, we can rid ourselves of the toxicity that holds us back in life. For many people, the toxicity encountered in the childhood home leads them to expect less than they deserve. They feel unworthy and incompetent. People who feel this way take jobs they don't really like just to pay the bills, and then stay in those jobs for years. They pursue toxic romantic relationships with partners who add little but misery to their lives. They choose toxic friends who undermine them. And why wouldn't they? Their experience of growing up having been marked by toxicity feels normal. But it's not. There is nothing normal about accepting toxicity as the default. Just because it's a common feature of the nuclear family does not mean to say that it's normal for children to emerge from their childhood homes feeling not good enough. You are good enough, and understanding that is half the battle. So let's look at some ideas to get you used to the idea that what happened in the childhood home is not how you should be defined. Letting go. Popular culture tells us that our legacy is to continue banging our heads against a brick wall when it comes to our families. Giving up on them is never an option. Cutting them out of your life? Not an option. Why? Because family, in our culture, and truthfully in most cultures, is a kind of icon of stability and well-being. But as we've already discussed above, the American family is anything but stable, given that 96% of families can be described as dysfunctional. Family aside, there's a great deal of currency given to the idea of persistence and determination in our culture. We're told repeatedly to stick to it. Giving up is seen as a sign of weakness or laziness. But the truth is that sometimes giving up is exactly what you need to do. To shed the toxicity of childhood, many of us have found that walking away from family members who define us as punching bags or dumping grounds for their insecurities is the only way forward. Doing so can cause rifts in the family unit. Not doing so condemns you to spend the rest of your life with a toxic family member who will just as soon spit on you than look at you. But you're not a martyr. Why should you be? The toxic family member isn't about to change. That person probably isn't even aware of how toxic he or she is. But it's not your job to fix them. It's your job to live your life as happily and successfully as possible. Letting go is sometimes the only option available to you. Sure, you may miss some family functions, and that's difficult, but you won't be sitting at every family event waiting for the toxic bloom to envelop you. It's a matter of priorities. When your life, and living it well, is the priority, then letting go is often required. If you choose not to let go, then you are choosing not to move forward. Unless you can find a way to work around the toxic relative, you are going to spend the rest of your life intermittently treated to the corrosion of that person and the destructive influence they exert on your well-being and your life. As you've just read, toxic relationships and families can lead to a procession of toxic relationships in your life. Whether romantic, platonic, or professional, beliefs that we take with us from our childhood homes infect our adult lives. Choosing to let go doesn't make you a bad person, which some members of your family will inevitably say you are because you've made that choice. It makes you an aware person. My story. I have very little to complain about regarding my childhood. My parents were mostly wonderful people. Not perfect like everybody else. My older brother was kind and nurturing, and he still is. But I've never had a healthy relationship with my younger brother. He was an underachiever and resented me because I was not. For decades, I did what I could to connect with him. I believed he'd grow out of his resentment and stop treating me as though problems in his life were all my fault. But he never did. Then, he got married. His wife, of course, had a similar personality profile to his, determined to have the life she thought she deserved but hadn't worked for, resentful of people with more money or talent, angry that the world wasn't giving her what she demanded. She targeted me for abuse the moment she and my brother were married. This continued for several years until my brother phoned me, demanding an apology for not visiting his son more regularly. I was married at the time, working full-time, and going to school. I didn't drive a car and lived in another city. I did what I could, but my efforts were deemed not good enough. I was uninvited from Christmas celebrations at their house for 5 years. I spent Christmas elsewhere. It would be 10 years before I'd spend Christmas with my family again, and when I finally did, my sister-in-law made it her mission to insult me as much as possible, delivering extremely corrosive digs at every opportunity. My brother sat passively, pretending not to hear her, but I knew that he was secretly enjoying the battering I was getting. I stopped going to family Christmases. Finally, I'd returned to the bosom of my family for a birthday celebration. I approached my brother and his wife, and as I did, they got up and left the area. My older brother's wife witnessed the behavior and reported this to my mother. Until that moment, my mother had been pleading with me to make it up with my other brother and his wife. She'd said that I should stop being bitter and just ignore them. Finally, she had witnessed the kind of nonsense these two family members, united in their resentment, were capable of. I have not spoken to either of them since that birthday celebration. And I never will again. My mother has stopped concerning herself with my choices, and while she mentions the two of them occasionally, she knows I have no interest in either of them. She understands, but only because she witnessed their treatment of me after many years of not seeing or speaking to me. I have great relationships with other family members, so there's little harm done, save the fact that I will not be in the same place as the problem pair under any circumstances. This may create the odd ripple, but it's a ripple I take full responsibility for, as my brother and his wife never will. I've broken off all contact, and now I'm free to enjoy my family on my terms. But what's the backstory? The backstory is standard fare, sibling rivalry. But as we got older and my younger brother grew to be larger than me, he started to physically attack me. I told my parents and they slapped his wrist. His underachiever status saved him from further repercussions. I was the smart one, so I was expected to absorb his attacks. Ballpoint pens, fingernails, fists. All I could do was avoid him to the best of my ability. I don't blame my parents. They were trying to understand what was wrong with him, and there was something wrong. But because of the stigma of mental illness, nothing was ever done. He was never diagnosed, and I was always cast as the one who had provoked him, even though all I had to do was be there to set him off. Try as I may, there was no healing his resentment against me. There was no way to make it better, and when he married, things got even worse. But I was no longer a child. I was able to walk away, and so I did. And you can too. While it's not popular, setting up a boundary to repel a toxic family member is often the only way to maintain healthy relationships in your family. While my mother is still not happy with the situation, my other family members understand. They know that being exposed to the abuse these two dished out, the gossip, the put-downs, the exclusion, and the continual complaints about my character, was tormenting me. By cutting them off, I made space for myself to grow. I made space to dump some of the beliefs my toxic relationship with my brother, and later his wife, compelled me to carry around as the result of my brother's resentment, including believing I was defective, believing I should reduce myself to make him feel better, believing that I was a problem to be solved, believing that it was my fault that my brother was the way he was, believing that if it hadn't been for me, my brother would have had a happier childhood and a more successful adulthood. There is much more about this relationship I could share, but I'd rather not. I think what I've told you is sufficient enough to illustrate that I'd reached my limit after decades of bearing up under it for the sake of family. Don't be bullied. If you have a toxic family member or members who are holding you back, having filled your head with false beliefs that have nothing to do with you and everything to do with them, please don't be bullied into allowing the situation to continue. My relationship with my brother deteriorated further following his marriage. This provided him with a flying monkey to say all the hurtful things he couldn't get away with saying to me. My sister-in-law knew that my brother resented me and nurtured that resentment, then added to it by being his voice. This rendered the situation intolerable, and so I finally cut the cord. You can do the same. You can rid yourself of family members who abuse you. There is nothing wrong with doing so. There is only freedom. Your family may not understand, but that's not your problem. They know more than they let on, and if they know, they should know better. Bullying you into a relationship with someone who torments you is not family love. It's abuse. Even if they don't know what they're asking of you, it's abuse. See it for what it is, but try not to judge your family too harshly. Remember that they believe, as many of us do, that the family is a sacred icon of contentment and well-being. But you know otherwise. You know that it's in the heart of the family that some of our most distorted self-perceptions are born. You also know that if the person or people in your family treated you the way they did in any other context, you would do your best to avoid being in their presence. They say that blood is thicker than water, but when that blood becomes toxic, it's time to clean it by removing the source of toxicity. It's for you. Your family will figure it out, and you will be free of the abusive millstone around your neck. Lurking in your mind, self-doubt. Ban, delete, shred, obliterate the words, "I'm not good enough." Karen Samuelson. Everyone doubts themselves sometimes. We all have a lurking inner voice that's often negative or downright hostile. Sometimes we let that inner voice get the upper hand, and when that happens, we far too often get stuck. We've just explained about family dysfunction and toxicity and how these distortions of family life can result in holding on to false beliefs occasioned by the toxic person's resentment. Part of that is nagging self-doubt. While not all self-doubt originates in families, much of it does. But wherever it comes from, it prevents us from truly owning our lives and living them to their fullest. Often, the voice inside us is negative, telling us that we're not enough of anything important, that we're losers of the highest order, or lowest, depending on how you look at it. And sometimes, we get so used to hearing that voice in our heads that it almost becomes comforting. We start to get a kind of self-generated Stockholm syndrome. We begin to identify with our negative inner voice, submitting to it in the absence of an escape route. But there is an escape route. While negative self-talk can be symptomatic of underlying psychological dysfunction, which is nothing more than a sector of our physical reality, it's common to all of us. The National Science Foundation reveals that 80% of our thoughts are negative and that many of the inner voice's statements are repetitive. And we wonder why we feel less than able to reach the fullness of our potentials. But why are we such negative, depressive downers? Fran Simone, PhD's article in Psychology Today, see resources for articles expressly mentioned in the text, points out that the worst liars are our fears. Fear leads to hatred, sooner or later, and when we're talking about our self-doubt, it's in the same neighborhood, if not in the same house. When most of our daily thoughts accentuate the negative, then it's a pretty straight line to not liking ourselves at all. When we doubt ourselves, we're not in a relationship with the truth of who we are. We're not connected to our fundamental strengths. We're divorced from our aptitudes. Why would we want the best for someone we're not that fond of, right? Why we do it. Nobody wants to hear uncomplimentary observations about themselves. When we do, when we have a poor job review or someone says something cutting about or to us, we tend to dwell on it. Events in which there's an element of criticism back us up against the wall. In her article for online publication, Very Well Mind, Kendra Cherry explains the human brain's negativity bias. She lays out why it is that negative events have a much stronger impact on the brain than positive ones do. Poor first impressions of people, the article points out, are lasting ones. Further traumas in our distant past have unbelievable staying power. The negativity bias is powerful, impacting our ability to form lasting relationships, retain meaningful employment, and to thrive. There is one important upside here, and that's that we learn much more from negative experiences than we do from positive ones. Positive experiences make us feel connected, empowered, and energized. They're self-validating. But negative experiences contain key life lessons. This is one way of addressing negative self-talk, by relating such experiences to how they impacted you emotionally, because that is the root of the negative messaging you associate with it. And this is the information you need to find the lesson it offers. By finding the lesson in the negative experience, you're more able to absorb it, move on, and still, that aspect of your inner voice's continual hectoring. It's a piecemeal approach, but effective. The worst liars. The truly corrosive aspect of the negativity bias is its influence on our decision-making processes. Our negative inner voice can talk us out of a lot of actions we should probably be taking. But because of our self-doubt, we hesitate. We question ourselves. We relent to our negative inner voice and choose the sure thing instead of reaching for the shiny thing. And that's why our inner voice, based as it is on the negativity bias, which renders 80% of our daily thoughts negative, is a big, obnoxious liar. Our fears are directly connected to our dominant negative thoughts, and those fears become the actions we don't take and yet should. Because the negative nature of our thoughts compels us, we miss opportunities that will never come again. And why? Because our inner voice is bullying us into believing that we're not good enough. We believe this lie because of life experiences that have disproportionately impacted us. Because our brain prefers to dwell on the negative, possibly tied to the primitive survival instinct, in which a threat is always a genuine threat, we fear that we truly are not good enough. But you know it's not true. So in this chapter, you're going to read about how to disengage from negative self-talk and how to make that disengagement stick. You're going to learn how to accentuate the positive and eliminate the influence of the negativity bias on your self-conception and your self-esteem. You know you. Your inner voice may think it's the boss, but you know you better. Your inner voice is just you, but it's a version of you that has arisen from your brain's stubborn insistence on being a bummer and your life experiences in concert. That's an objective way of looking at negative self-talk, which has an extensive empirical basis. It all seems a little less sad looking at it this way, doesn't it? In fact, looking at self-doubt from an objective standpoint almost seems like a no-brainer. There's no self-pity involved because, hey, it's your brain making this happen. That frees you to think about the obnoxious inner voice a little less subjectively. Detachment isn't all bad, even when we're talking about our brain and its impact on your emotional framework. It's important to remember, as we discuss all this, that there is nothing unduly complicated about questioning why we perceive things in a certain way and imagining how we can look at them in a healthier way. People sometimes think of their negative thought patterns as foreign to them, but this doesn't acknowledge their true source, which is the brain and its storehouse of submerged information of memories and associations in the subconscious. People tend to get a little nervous when you use that word, but it's nothing more sinister than a silent partner in your physiological makeup. Again, an active part of your physical person and inextricable from it. You know yourself, whether you believe that or not. You know your strengths and weaknesses. You know how you behave when presented with certain circumstances and situations. Being secure about who you are and what you bring to the table makes it easier to manage everything in life, from job interviews to friendships to grocery shopping. So, let's talk about some effective ways to curb negative self-talk and, in doing so, temper self-doubt with self-knowledge. 1. Be aware. As I pointed out earlier, negative thoughts can become patterns. They're familiar to the point that you find them almost comforting. But you can do better. And the way you can do better is through awareness. It's often the case that a good day goes bad over something that, in the greater scheme of things, is exceedingly minor. Missing the bus may set you off. Forgetting something important at the grocery store can make you crazy. Minor events like these can set you off on a spiral of negative thinking in which everything around you seems to conspire to mess with your mood. But your mood is up to you. How you respond is much more important than what you're responding to. And in that response lies your power to corral negative thinking and disable it. Recognizing the trigger, a minor hitch in your day, as having the potential to send you into a pattern of negative thinking that's going to affect everything else you do is the key to this approach. Think about the incident objectively. How important is it if you're honest with yourself and not just wallowing in the negativity? What's more important is your awareness of thoughts that resulted from the incident. What is the first thing you have when you miss the bus, forget something at the grocery store, or get the wrong order at the sandwich shop? You may think something like, "Well, this is typical," implying that you're always stuck on the short end of the stick. "That sandwich maker hates me." It sounds ridiculous because it is. This is just the way life goes. Wallowing in self-pity. Some days I can't do anything right. See above. Thoughts like these are self-abusive. You are not the target of some shady conspiracy to make your life hell. And if your idea of hell is missing the bus or getting the wrong sandwich, you're pretty soft, kid. Stuff happens. It happens all the time to every single one of us. But when stuff happens, we have a choice. We can feel sorry for ourselves and descend into a spiral of negativity, or we can shrug our shoulders and keep going. Sure, if the sandwich shop gives us the wrong order every time, we should probably find another sandwich shop. But mistakes happen, and personalizing those mistakes is a fool's errand. It isn't all about you. Stopping the negative narrative at its root takes practice, but choosing to allow incidents that shouldn't be viewed as major problems to roll off you is the better choice. You'll be less stressed out, more cheerful, and thus happier. And when you're happier, people notice. Check in with yourself when negative incidents lead you toward a negative self-talk spiral. Examine the incident and thoughts that came to you as they unfolded. Ask yourself why these thoughts arose and why you're so upset by the incident. Ask yourself what's behind the thought and whether the thought is objectively true. Questioning yourself and your responses is the first step toward tailoring your thoughts toward positive thinking and the outcomes that come with it. 2. Change your lens. Becoming aware of your thought patterns and what triggers them is a function of mindfulness. Awareness of the moment you're living in and how you're functioning at that moment is key to self-development. Awareness is the beginning of all changes, allowing you to see the nature of what's going on inside you and why it is happening. This is the foundation of building a new way of thinking. Understanding negativity and how it arises leads us to understand that negative thinking is rooted in the beliefs we have about ourselves, beliefs that aren't true. I convinced myself that I was lazy. For years, I believed that I was a foot-dragging lout with no interest in doing much of anything. I'm not sure where this belief came from, but I suspect they came from an elementary school teacher who will remain nameless. The truth is that I'm anything but. But because of this deeply ingrained belief I carried around for so long, I allowed myself to accept employment that wasn't right for me. It seemed that these jobs were just fine. They paid the rent and bought groceries. The problem was that I hated them. I was bored, unfulfilled, and thus living in a self-fulfilling prophecy. I faced each working day as though it was a tremendous burden. Because I believed I was lazy, that became the reality of my working life, preventing me from reaching a little higher. I had convinced myself of something that wasn't true, and then I allowed it to hold me back professionally for far too long. How did I break out of that? I flipped the thought. The flip side of laziness is industry, and so the belief became, I am industrious, I get things done. And that's the truth. It was always the truth, but because of my ingrained belief, I didn't think I was doing enough. When I realized the truth, I sucked up the courage to ask others about their perceptions, and guess what? Their comments echoed my new belief, that I am industrious and I get things done. Choose a positive lens to see yourself through. Commit to seeing yourself and your life through that positive new lens by being aware of your thinking and how it affects every aspect of your life. 3. Being there. Being aware of your thoughts, as I've already hinted, is related to mindfulness, which is something I'm sure you've heard and read a lot about. Mindfulness is a practice that pulls us away from our preoccupations with what happened yesterday or even 10 minutes ago, and what's about to happen. Living in the present moment allows us to connect with ourselves and our reactions to the world around us. It also instills in us a sensitivity to the moment we're living in, its gifts and its challenges. Published in the Clinical Psychology Review in 2017, Emily Lindsay and David Cresswell's study, Mechanisms of Mindfulness Training, Monitor and Acceptance Theory, MAT, presents an application of mindfulness that interests us for the purposes of this book. MAT posits that acceptance of how things are is necessary for mindfulness to have a positive impact on stress and the mental health outcomes associated with it. When we monitor our thoughts, we short-circuit a tendency to act out in anger and frustration. When we add acceptance to that monitoring, we short-circuit the possibility of our thoughts impacting our mental health and stunting our potential. In this model lies a simple means to approach the need to eliminate or reduce negative thinking by taking a note of our thoughts at that moment and then accept the moment for what it is. By accepting events as they happen and not personalizing or making them into a catastrophe, making a mountain out of a molehill, we put these events and the thoughts that arise when they occur in their place. Here, I should note that making a note of your thoughts does not mean suppressing them. To understand the role they play in stress and dysfunction, we need to actively acknowledge negative thoughts and then accept them as part of the moment. Our negative thoughts may seem mundane to us, run-of-the-mill thought patterns that we're accustomed to. But until we're able to confront and connect negative thinking to negative outcomes, they will still be there, messing with us. Suppressing our negative thought patterns is like stuffing a cranky tiger into a bottle. You can shove the stopper as far into the bottle as it will go, but you know that sooner or later that tiger will get out. Negative thoughts only have as much power as we give them. When we address them directly, recognizing them for what they are, thoughts with no other significance, we own them. And isn't owning these negative thoughts better than letting them own you? When you own your thoughts, you're not necessarily trying to understand them. You're just looking at them, accepting them, and moving on. Instead of allowing them to send you into a tailspin of self-doubt and the wallowing assertion that you're not good enough. When the thought arises, it comes to you in this form: I'm not good enough. When you focus on the thought, you need to transform it, changing it into something like, I think I'm not good enough. When you've got to that point of your thought transformation exercise, you can even go further, thinking, I entertain thoughts that I'm not good enough. In this progression, you take the thought from having the status of a threat to your self-esteem to the status of a mere thought that occurs among many other things, like, I want a sandwich, or I need to go to the washroom. You reduce the toxicity of the thought by claiming its power for yourself and divesting the thought of any power it might have had in its raw state. And so, the process is relatively simple. Awareness of the raw thought, transformation of the raw thought to the status of what it is, just a thought, and further transformation of the thought as a function of your mind, which isn't the truth, but just a random manifestation of self-defeating beliefs. But owning your negative thoughts is a process that takes commitment and practice. While it may sound simple, if you're reading this, then I'm sure you'll be aware that sometimes the simplest sounding actions can be the most demanding. In this instance, you'll be pleased to hear that the hardest part of owning your thoughts is the regular practice of being mindful to them, addressing them, and then transforming them. And only practice and repetition of the act of transforming your thoughts into what they really are, functions of your lively brain, can divest them of the power they have over your life. Self-doubt is deeply disabling, and most of us suffer from at least a little of it. When self-doubt becomes our co-pilot, though, we become paralyzed by it, cleaving to it like a security blanket. But you're too old for a binky, friend, so your binky, the nagging self-doubt that prevents you from stepping into your full potential, needs to go away, and you are the only one who can make this happen. Being present to your negative thoughts and the events that cause them to surface is a reliable tool to gain control of them. Know your thoughts. Name your thoughts, own them, and transform them by putting them in their place. Negative thinking, as common as it is to the human brain, can be overcome, but you need to be present and aware of them to make it happen. You need to be present with your thoughts, engaging with them. When you're able to do that, you're reclaiming your power by draining it from the negative thinking patterns that derail your best laid plans. This is because being present with your thoughts means that you're paying keen attention to them instead of allowing them to roll through your mind unhindered. You can take away their ability to throw you into a self-pitying funk. You own them because you're paying attention to them. Other tips. Self-confidence is about knowing who you are. It's about confronting the negative messages in your brain and neutralizing them. But it's also about living your truths. Our truths aren't those of others. They define us and the actions we take in life. Stop comparing yourself to others. You are you. Other people are other people. Other people can't offer the world what you have to offer, and vice versa. Comparing yourself and your aptitudes to others and what they bring to the table is an exercise in futility. Apples don't compare themselves to oranges. They're two completely different objects under the category of fruit. You come to the party bearing unique gifts just like everyone else in the room. And even if you're in the same line of work as someone else, a comparison is meaningless. What you bring is irreplaceable and indispensable. Live your values and ethics. We all have values, and most of us have an ethical framework. But many of us don't live these convictions. We believe, in a very abstract way, in what we consider to be our values and ethics. When you live your values and ethics, you apply them to every aspect of your life. They become like the imprint you leave on the world around you. Whether you believe that the elderly should always be accompanied to the other side of the street and live that belief out, or you believe that corruption is socially corrosive and call it out when you see it, people notice when you stand for something. And when you stand for something, there is no doubt in your mind about who you are. You become less inclined to listen to negative thoughts or to take heed of invalid negative external assessments. Because you're actively adhering to your own values and ethics, you know you're doing what's right for you, and that's not a matter that is open to the critique of other people. Sometimes your values and ethical framework may run counter to those of people around you. You may be called out for whatever stance they've led you to, whether that means you're a vegetarian or vegan for the sake of animals, or someone who rides a bicycle instead of driving a car. Some people have a problem with those who wear strong ethics and values on their sleeves, but most of us regard people who do that as strong. And it doesn't matter what others think or what your negative thoughts have to say about your convictions because they're your convictions. And when we have convictions about the way a just life is lived, we know we're doing what's right for us, which is in itself self-validating. Self-validation through the active pursuit of ethical behavior and clearly defined values builds you up as a human being. It places you in a well-defined place in the world with well-defined boundaries. Boundaries are your defenses against the rude assaults of the world and your self-definition. What you'll put up with, what you won't be a part of, and what hill you'll die on. Being alive to your boundaries and connection with your values and ethics means being more alive to the potential in you, the strength that makes you someone who doesn't doubt yourself, because you know who you are. And knowing yourself is the foundation to living a satisfying life by navigating it intelligently. Next, let's talk about setting goals and, more importantly, meeting them.